when I really discovered what productivity meant to me changed at the time because like I actually wanted to use productivity to allow me to spend more time with people that I love.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Show. Today, we have Susan Shu Chang. She is a data science consultant. Previously, she was a principal data scientist at Clearco, helping e-commerce founders by building machine learning-powered investing. Before that, she developed the company's very first ML-powered website recommender system, deployed to millions of customers, and created a custom OpenAI gym environment for a reinforcement learning project in production. She is also the founder and developer of Quill Game Studios, selling around 10K copies of debut games in 6 months. She has given talks at PyCon Canada, Toronto Machine Learning Summit, and more. She writes about her career journey and learnings on susanshu.com. If you have been enjoying the show, subscribe to the channel, give me a five-star review, and leave a comment. Welcome to the show, Susan.
Hey, Daliana, it's really good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on the show, talk about your previous projects as well. So how did you get into data science? I read a little bit of your blog and know you almost got kicked out from your econ major in college.
Yep. Yeah, so I guess if we're beginning from there's kind of like a long journey. So as you mentioned, like in undergrad, I wasn't very sure. Like I was in economics at the University of Waterloo. And then I was interested in it. And then I think only in the upper years, I started to recover from some bad grades. And then I learned about econometrics, which has, economics and use a lot more statistical methods to analyze data. I found that I, first of all, liked it. Second of all, really did well in it, which actually propelled me to be able to do grad school at the University of Toronto in economics, which is really competitive. But then there I kind of, started learning more. And then I found out from a friend who basically mentioned, hey, have you heard about data science? It's a combination of, the stats you're learning and these kind of economic specializations, as well as like the programming you've been learning, because I was actually self-learning programming when I was in undergrad to make video games, right? So my friend knew about that. Yeah, then he said it's a combination. You could look into that for your career. And I did, and I Googled it that day. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is actually a really good combination of my two interests, which are like the economics portion, as well as like the programming portion. So then, I studied for some interviews and I was able to get my first role, which was in Bell Canada at a large telecom in Canada.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So when you started at Bell, what was your first project like?
Oh, so I guess like they had a really good onboarding and mentorship, which I'm really grateful for. So I would say like the first project I did was like a churn model. So I guess like a fairly commonly seen model in many industries like banking or telecom. So based on like users and their activity or, their behavior lately, like predict if they're going to leave us. And then if you're going to leave us, then you can, give them some promotions or things like that for retention, right? So I did that. But the thing that really helped actually, because it was my very first job out of school, was like they actually had a mentor that built a model that was for another geography. So let's say there's like provinces in Canada, so like different states in the United States, right? So let's say they were building one for California, and then I built one for, let's say, like Washington or something like that. So it was just like a very nice mentorship process because I was able to, make some changes to my own model, but I had like a way to reference, and then they helped me navigate. In large corporations, you understand, it's just like the data is like everywhere, and then all the tables and all the things are everywhere. So it was really nice to be able to hit the ground running thanks to that project.
Yeah. And then do you remember what type of models you use, or was it more like analytics? You look at when people churn, or did you build any models, say using any like predictive models or say like survival analysis?
I would say like the first model was like pretty simple. It was some sort of like regression model, to
Mm,
be honest. And then we were able to have a production process, which just like put it into production. So it would update, I believe, like either daily or weekly or something like that. But the model itself was like a pretty, like simple like regression model.
yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing that. And when I was looking at the past project you worked on, and I think the reinforcement learning project was really interesting because when I think about reinforcement learning, I know you're also in gaming, right? I know a lot
Mm-hmm.
of game companies use reinforcement learning. So can you tell us more about the background of that project and why you use reinforcement learning and how you build a solution?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I guess like I'll add some more context to this because this
Yeah.
was the reinforcement learning and the OpenAI gym stuff that I did was in Bell Canada as well, and that was like
Mhm.
close to, I guess after I'd gotten like 2 years of experience or so. So
Mhm.
then at the time, I had started volunteering or just like running interviews or kind of in-person meetups or podcasts with folks in reinforcement learning and recommender systems, because actually before
Yeah.
that I was working on recommender systems, so I was able to
Mhm.
learn much more about reinforcement learning through my involvement in that like meetup group. So it's called like aggregate intellect, and we used to do in-person meetups, and of course with the pandemic kind of changed to online. But then I was able to interview folks from like, let's say, the previous Uber AI who was doing reinforcement learning, Matthew Taylor, who was part of Borealis AI, and part of University of Alberta, and then also I think this guy Hassanpour, or I need to remember his name, but right now he's at Google, and he previously worked at on reinforcement learning to teach robots, like a physical small robots, to play soccer. Oh, his name is
Yeah.
Hassan Clever Basani.
Mhm.
So yeah, like I was able to do that, and then through that I gained a lot of knowledge. So then in the group in my work, they were able to entrust me to join this project, which was like I guess a bit more advanced and had some more
Mhm.
senior folks working on it. But the I guess I'm not going to speak too like detailed, but I'm going to use an
Yeah.
analogy in another
Sure.
industry to say what this reinforcement learning is doing. So
Mhm.
I guess after gaining this trust that I was able to contribute to this project, so imagine in, let's say, some big company. I'm just going to use a cybersecurity company, for example, because I was recently talking to someone about it. So let's say you have like malware analysts, right? And they're in this company, they have senior analysts, and then they might do like these things. Like they take like 5 steps. They might analyze one thing, analyze the second thing, troubleshoot the third thing, and then like they can discover what it is, right? But then maybe for a more junior analyst, they don't really know where to start looking, right? So we might
Mhm.
use a machine learning example to be like, hey, we have this kind of whole history of like the telemetry of what the senior analyst would be doing, right? So let's say the senior analyst is step one, did step two, it gets them closer to the answer, and it's like turns out the malware is like malware A, right? So we have this kind of sequence of events, and then so we have like this reinforcement learning agent, which is like based on each action that the analyst will take. So it'll be like, hey, like this action is good, so I'm going to learn the reward is going to be good. So the agent knows like, hey, given this state or like this environment, right, which is just like, oh, like there's this malware with these traits, and then like
Mhm.
this kind of analyst that's like trying to discover it. What is the best next step? So it'll have like a list of actions that the analyst can take, and then it'll
Yeah.
basically be able to find the values of them and rank them, and then pick the one with the highest reward value.
Mhm.
Yeah, so basically it almost recommends the next action
Right.
to an analyst, and this could be used for lots of types of industries, as well, and even for recommender systems. Like people are combining reinforcement learning and recommender system because
Yeah.
you can phrase it in a way that it's like it's recommending the next thing based on the highest
Mhm.
reward.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I previously worked a little bit on reinforcement learning, and one challenge I faced was is sometimes really hard to find the right reward. And so, how do you solve this problem? How do you find the right metric?
Yeah, like this is one of the, I guess, one of the, it's simultaneously simple but difficult, right? So,
Mm,
for one example we had is to, I guess I'm just gonna use the telecom example then, because like it
mm,
could be that you have the reinforcement learning will suggest the next step, which is like just, you know, delete everything, right? For example, like something silly, and then that would
yeah,
maybe solve all the issues, for
right.
example, right? But that's not how it works necessarily. In the long term, that's obviously a bad action, right? So it's kind of like the optimization problem where, let's say you are a customer support person and you want to help the customer, right? So let's say the reinforcement learning agent is recommending just give them $50 off, right, each time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that will, in the short run, make the customers happy, but that's not
Mm,
the most cost efficient way, right? So in the
right.
reward function, we could build in something that deducts the amount of, money the company will spend on this action that the reinforcement learning agent is recommending, and also the lifetime value or like the present value of like the customer. So let's say you give them, like $10 off or something, but then they can stay for, let's say they stay with us for 6 months or 1 year, right? So that value can be learned by the reinforcement learning agent to be like, hey, this customer still stayed with us. That's good for us because we earn money
Mm,
too, right? So it also,
yeah.
it takes into account that. And if you just give them a lot of money and they just churn right away, then that's really bad for the reinforcement learning agent. So they'll learn not to do
Right.
something like that. So for a lot of different companies, this reward structure is very different, right? Like, because I've
Mm,
previously worked with a rewards company. So, like, they do like reward points and things like that. And the things they might optimize for are different because they are, aiming to give discounts, right? But then they also want to have the customer be able to be sticky to them and stuff like that. So you can add even things like retention or other types of things into the reward as well.
mm. Got it. So you can combine multiple metrics into the reward.
Yep.
Uh, yeah. And so when you launch the reinforcement learning, how do you put it in production? How did you monitor the performance?
Yeah, so I guess that's also like a really good kind of thing to understand at the get-go as well, because like I think one thing that our team did do well was, be able to have those partnerships with, let's say, data engineering and on the business side to understand what we're doing. Because like for a company that's just starting out in reinforcement learning, let's say, or someone starting a reinforcement learning project from scratch, is like the continuous updating of the reinforcement learning agent. So the
Mm,
agent is
yeah,
basically, it's updating itself every time there's an action and there's a feedback, right? So if we don't have that end-to-end pipeline going, and I've worked with large corporations who have that set up and small companies who do not have that set up, right? So that's one of the
yeah,
challenges, which is like needing to continuously monitor it, but then also, just at the beginning, be able to identify what you need. So what we would need is like, of course, like let's say when like tracking all the actions, right? Let's say the analyst did this analysis, or we gave them 10% off for the telecom example, or
mm,
something like that. We need to track all of that, and we also, of course, need to grab in like all, let's say, the customers lifetime value. So let's say in subsequent months, how much they're paying us, right? Or if they churned, like that all needs to be fed back. So it does end up to be like quite a large scale end to end project, right? And if that is in the company, then that's great. And if it's not, then it might be a bit harder. But we need, as long as you know that, right, then you can set that up in your own company as well. Just know that
mm,
the kind of end to end and kind of like fast, the faster you can get that data back to the reinforcement
yeah,
learning agent, the more it can learn, right? But
mm,
sometimes there was one case that I worked with where they might have an action. They can only do an action like every like 1 week or 2 weeks, right? So let's pretend that for a case where the customer support only gets a query once a month or once a week, right? The agent will only learn once a week or once a month, right? So it can be a game of patience with the monitoring as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? When the agent only update once a week, because sometimes you also don't want the update to be kind of too sensitive to like a small change.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so it definitely depends on the situation.
Yeah. And so although the agent can learn, for example, the example of giving customer rewards, like what is the optimal amount of rewards, but those idea of giving rewards or I don't know, extend the subscription period, those type of things has to be fed to the agent by the data scientist. So as a data scientist, how do you come out with those ideas of rewards? Like, how do you get that domain knowledge? Who do you work with?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And this is like kind of the value of teamwork, I would say, because like I remember with the kind of rewards, let's say there's people who are, I guess, more on the data analyst side. And of course, like as a data scientist, I also have those skills, but they have the domain knowledge of like what kind of rewards or like what kind of baskets they've looked at, things like that. And then we are able to speak to them and like understand what are feasible things to offer, or like we might get some requirements or some lists of kind of explanations of like, because as a data scientist, when I access the reward code, it's like, like 60 underscore discount underscore like blah underscore blah. And I'm like, what is that? And it turns out you have to, communicate and ask like, oh, it turns out it's like a 60-day discount for $5 or, something like that. So it's definitely not the domain knowledge needs to come from folks who work closely with the actual kind of product side or offer side. Yeah, so I think that's a really good question, and that's how I was able to kind of come up with that. And then there was some iteration where I'm like, oh, do you think this way to calculate the lifetime value makes the most sense? Because sometimes the business side has a definition for it. Then I can, the closer I can be to that, the easier it is for me to, basically communicate to the stakeholders that this is providing positive value, right? And of course, like for some parts of the ML, it can't be one-to-one to like with what the business side uses to calculate, let's say on accounting purposes, right? It's not the same, but it can be used as a kind of baseline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And after you say the algorithm find some optimized rewards, do you go back to the product to run by them? Hey, does it make sense? Are we able to give them this much discount? Or
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's definitely important because like I guess in the projects I worked on, right, there was business buy-in at the beginning, of course, but then we also don't want to lose the trust by of course, they will worry that the agent's just going to do something silly, like offer you some sort of absurd like discount or some sort of absurd coupon, right? So it could really like hinge on the trust between the team as well, and that just depends on like the communication of those things.
Yeah, and for folks who want to learn more about reinforcement learning, what are some like books or blogs you recommend?
I think for the books, there's definitely like the classic, which is like the reinforcement learning kind of book by Richard Sutton and Andrew Barto. So I think that's available for free or just like in a lot of sources online. That's actually where I started learning about some of the just like, basics and foundations of reinforcement learning. And of course, like I would kind of look into some of the, like you mentioned, game use cases, right? So because for me, I learn well when there's like a specific example. So I would look at like Google DeepMind's research on using reinforcement learning for chess, right? So I think that was a way I really learned the foundations as well. So for people who are interested in those use cases, there are those examples as well. Yeah, but then when we bring it down to industry use cases, right? Like like non-game industry use cases, then you can see how the concepts like transfer. And that was how I learned it.
Yeah. And so have you been following maybe some recent development of reinforcement learning? What is like some current popular like use cases or models?
Ooh, yeah. So I guess like the journey I did, so I haven't been following like everything because it's like such a big field.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess like the way I started was like from, as I mentioned, the chess stuff. So there was like AlphaGo, AlphaGo Zero, and then so that was like an upgraded version of like their the Google DeepMind's like chess and like kind of other kind of chess type games algorithms. But then also like they I guess more recently, but it's probably 2 years ago at this point, is like they had a reinforcement learning for StarCraft, which is like a much more complicated online game. But I would say recently what I've been following is less so what DeepMind was doing, but rather just like the reinforcement learning as applied to recommender system. I know I keep bringing that stuff up, but because it's such a core thing of what I worked on at that point, and the way that these two are colliding, there's even like NLP, how to use NLP to combine with reinforcement learning, how to use NLP to combine with recommender systems that wasn't here like 3 or 4 years ago, right? That I think actually this is one of the ways that I've been keeping up to date, and then just like seeing the interesting things from other subfields and then how they are being applied.
Yeah, definitely want to, get into how NLP helps reinforcement learning or recommender system. But since you already mentioned in my next question, can you tell us more about the recommender system you built?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess like because the company didn't previously have a recommender system on their website, they were using they were using a rules-based approach for, let's say the customer has done this or the customer's bill is almost due, right? So then remind them to pay their bill, right? But then because there's so many items, right? So then I guess we wanted to use a machine learning way to be able to rank those suggested kind of tiles or actions. And I guess this is similar to, any other recommender system on any other website out there, which is like you can have videos or tiles or some sort of entities or products that are being recommended. So then I was able to, I guess like the beginning was actually just data analysis. So just being like, what is available to feed into the recommender system, right? So we have some stuff about the customer's attributes, of course, right? Like some, how long they've been with us. I don't know, like hundreds of thousands of such attributes, and like their kind of click stream behavior data, which is also pretty typical for most companies with that kind of telemetry with you can ask like the customer's kind of clicks and actions on the sites are all tracked, right? That's common for every company. So we also had that available. So then the first thing was kind of just doing some analysis of like, hey, there's actually some general, what's it called? Like iterations. So kind of where I actually built two prototype models, one with matrix factorization, which is also like a kind of traditional way for doing recommender system, right? Yeah. So I was like, I tried that. I tried alternating least squares, which is like a similar method, but then more optimized, computationally optimized, which was good because we had millions of customers. So like some more like computational ways of like optimizing it, and then also tried an XGBoost prototype. But then the thing is like iterating on it, we found that, of course, I guess in hindsight, it makes sense because XGBoost does kind of decently on customers who have been with us for a while because we have tracked maybe months of their data, right? So an XGBoost model can perform slightly better compared to like some other matrix factorization, but matrix factorization performed better on newer customers, right? Because like, and this in hindsight, it makes sense, but before you go into it, you can't just predict like, well, I'm just going to use like matrix factorization related techniques and optimizations or, some sort of ensemble model to do this. You can't predict that, right? So it's like a kind of really interesting way that we iterated on it. And actually the XGBoost model after the prototype was done, like we had some other teammates come on the team. So then they were able to take that over and then we launched it together. But it was like after the kind of initial kind of analysis, building the models, being able to identify the strengths of performance via like kind of offline evaluation as well as kind of historical monitoring, present the case to stakeholders, and then we were able to put it into production and then monitor it for even longer and then confirm that that was true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned it's hard to do. Did you, if I understand correctly, you mentioned it's hard to do ensemble from matrix factorization and XGBoost perspective. So do you use different models for customers in different life cycles?
Ooh, yeah, I think that's a good question, and that might have been carried on later, which I wasn't aware because I guess like I had left. But when I was still there on the project, there were different things I had kind of had prototyped a little bit, which is like, of course, for matrix factorization, you can have multiple ways to encode the customer attributes, right? Like because you can kind of you can either just have a lot of attributes or you can just have like specific attributes, right? So like clickstream attributes or kind of like other kind of attributes that they have, right? So what I mentioned is like how long they've been with us. So kind of like a way to do some sort of feature encoding or like feature importance on those going in, which actually change the results of the matrix factorization. Because I guess matrix factorization is simple at the core, but you can build so much around what goes into how you there's tons of companies using just deep learning to try to figure out the way you can kind of identify the product, right? Or like summarize, hey, this product is like an electronics product, or it's like an iPhone, maybe like, things like that, right? So there's so much that goes on into like the user's attributes as well as like the items that are being recommended. So like that's one thing we had been looking into, and then I had tried a few different variants of doing.
Yeah. And how did you add the reinforcement learning element in it?
Oh, for the website, I did not do the reinforcement learning element combined actually, but there is like definitely a lot of ways which like, let's say we would update. There would have been ways to build that out, but I did not like kind of combine it.
Okay. But like, say in general, to solve a problem, how can someone add reinforcement learning to their recommender system?
Yeah. So this is like, there was actually I think there was one talk I gave before. Yeah, it was about like a paper from Google, specifically about the YouTube use case where they were using reinforcement learning. So to do the YouTube recommender system, like they run thousands of experiments at a time, but like one of such family of experiments was using reinforcement learning. So it'd be like, let's say I'm a user. So they would like instantiate like this reinforcement learning agent on YouTube, right? So then based on what I click, like let's say I click and then I clicked on something that's like gaming related. So then I keep watching and I keep watching and stuff like that. Then the agent would treat it as like a good reward, right? So then they would update with like, oh, okay, like this user, like Susan likes to watch gaming related videos, right? So then the next time I come online, like they would recommend me more of that. But then because of, you can't just like, only show gaming videos because that's like really boring, right? So then they actually have ways there. It's like the exploration and exploitation trade-off in reinforcement learning. So then they would have some like, let's say popular videos. They might just show some like popular stuff like Ariana Grande or, some other just general stuff that everyone likes in different categories. So they might be like pop music or like rock music or kind of like, tinkering with electronics or something like that is popular. And then if I go down those actions, then the reinforcement learning would be like, oh, Susan also likes, like pop music or, some other things. And if I do not click on something, or maybe I click on something and I immediately exit out, right? I close YouTube and then the algorithm might be like, oh, like this is a negative action. So it'll update with like, this is not good. So next time I won't show Susan this. And this is like the way, like just like the structure of the way that recommender systems and reinforcement learning can be combined together. There's actually some other fascinating stuff that is like of course there's some ethics stuff, right? If they keep rabbit holing you into something, it's easy to
Mhm.
just like get stuck in some sort of strange, portion of
Yeah,
YouTube, right?
everything's flat.
Yeah, yeah. And like I've read a lot of papers on how they were trying to address that. Like obviously there's like
Yeah.
so many ways. It's hard to fully address that all the time, but some ways are of course like the exploration, which is just like they'll show you different things, so then you can kind of click out of that rabbit hole.
Mhm.
Another thing is like changing the reward function of or the reward structure of the reinforcement learning agent. So I guess this is the same for a lot of social media, where before the reward might actually be like what keeps them on the website the most long. So that might just be
Yeah.
like sensational titles and sensational stuff over and over
Right.
again, and you'll just like keep staying on it. But if
Mhm.
the metric is more like, well, you return to the site, and you don't like binge too long,
Mm.
bad for your health, I guess, or something like, it's more about like the session, or like more about like, hey, does this user kind of like stick with us in a sustained but healthy way if the
Yeah.
reward is structured like that, instead of like the very greedy kind of like they just stay on our site for five
Mm.
hours, right? Then it
Right.
changes what is being recommended. And that's a way that, the recommender system and reinforcement learning can address some of those issues. Of course, there's still more at play, right? But the more kind of robustness you can add, right, the
Mhm.
better it can address these things.
Right. So how you understand, like if you stay on the site for too long, you get burnout. Like for example, on Instagram, I think a lot of people are deleting Instagram because they feel like they're staying on it too long. Now there's a feature, if you scroll till the end of your feed, I think it tells you, hey, you're at the end, to
Yeah.
remind the user maybe like take a break. Um, so how does those type of functions go back into the reward? Is it kind of like a threshold that you can put in there, or you have another matrix like, customers, I don't know, satisfaction, kind of fulfillment?
I guess like I guess like the Instagram example, I'm not sure how they are doing it, but I guess like it could be a combination of like a rules based
Mm-hmm.
thing, or like I'm pretty sure that they must have had a way to be like, users are getting burned out, right? So we
Yeah.
need to do something. And I think that could have been a reaction to what
Mm.
has already been found out. And then that was a way to improve the algorithm by putting like this kind of stopgap there. And then
Yeah.
I'm sure they're also tracking how effective that is as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that is probably like a combination of just like the recommender and then kind of like the business side product decision. Like that's what I am currently guessing. But yeah, it
Yeah.
could be, and I'm sure they're tracking like whether
Mm-hmm.
people are actually listening to that, or, I think when I get the prompt, I do exit out of the app, right? And I think for
Yeah.
them, I think that might be a positive thing. Like if I
Mm-hmm.
were them, I might be like, hey, this is actually a positive thing because the prompt is working. But then also like that helps me come back. Like I haven't deleted my app because I actually don't feel
Right.
like I'm burning out or anything,
Yeah.
right? So maybe
Yeah.
that's a positive thing in their like let's say Rexes or their
Mm-hmm.
reinforcement learning.
Yeah. And for the YouTube example is interesting. I think sometimes it's hard to rely on the users to, I just magically get out of the rabbit hole, right? And so I think the algorithm designer, or some user experience designer need to come up with some type of metrics to measure whether someone is like going down the rabbit hole. It could also be something like, oh, I'm learning machine learning. I'm watching this video and
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. So from this perspective, do you think how can we develop those metrics to correctly measure, the user's perception or like the type of reward that they should put in?
Yeah, I think this is definitely like, and I would actually say because like for sites like YouTube or like they have actually like so much data because like they do stuff such as like they have they just generally use like every sort of technique that's available. So it could be like NLP to be like, hey, or like kind of image recognition or like slash NLP to be like, this video is kind of related to this encoding. Like they might be able to analyze the video and say like, this is a video about soccer, right? For example. And then like they use that as part of like some sort of, let's say, reward function. And then it might be depend on like the, like you said, like how we are able to evaluate if the user is kind of getting value out of this, right? And then if it's causing kind of negative state. So it might be like they're able to feed in all these like video attributes as well as like the users kind of, if they focus more on maybe not only session length, like session length is still good, right? But it might not, they could downweight it, for example, or like the ML could learn to downweight it, because I'm pretty sure a lot of this is automated. Like I know they've done some techniques where, they would be able to pick some metrics depending on like what the ML sees, right? And then another thing is like if the user returns to the site, right? If I still, if I kind of go from, let's say, try to be on YouTube, an extreme example, like 10 hours a day, right? To like 1 hour a day, but I still come back every day of the week, right? That is still good for the reward function. Like that is good because it shows like retention, as well as like, I don't know if they will specifically, like penalize, right? Or have a negative reward for a super long session. But if they are focusing on like retention, for example, or kind of like engagement, so it could be like commenting or sharing, they are tracking the sharing as well. Like they can see like if that has increased as in addition.
Yeah. And you talk about NLP and recommendation. So, do you mean like using the structure like encoder, or what do you mean by like using NLP in this type of problem?
Yeah, this is actually something that was really interesting. I actually forgot the paper this was in, so I could kind of go look that up. And it was a while ago. I'm sure much more has come out. But basically, I guess because I'm not an NLP practitioner, I just kind of, follow some news and some friends mentioned some stuff to me. But I guess at the core, right, one portion of NLP is predicting the next thing. So let's say it's a sentence like, hello, how are you, right? So it could be like, you have the first word, which is hello, right? And the next word could be predicting. So think about your phone keyboard, right? It could be like, actually it's a rank of tens of thousands of words, right? They're able to select a bag of it and then they rank what's the next word. So when you think about it this way, it seems like NLP is recommending the next word or the next sequence of words, right? And the next sequence of words or the next word each have a probability associated with them. So this could be tied into like recommender system, right? Because you're like, if you think about it, when a user is on a website, when you click on one thing, that's your first thing in the sequence. And your next click could be out of many things, right? And then you can have a probability associated with the next thing. So it's kind of like if each click is a word in a sentence, how do you predict the sentence, right? Or like the sequence of clicks.
The sequence, yeah.
Yeah. So like there's ways to do that. People have tried it out. I'm not sure if it works in production. Some of the papers are in more sandbox environments, right? But then when I think about it that way, that means like it opens up a lot of, kind of, it's not NLP per se, but it's using the technical NLP technique to frame reinforcement learning.
Yeah.
And recommender system, I mean, yeah.
Right. So basically, it again, using the example of someone go to your website, basically you're putting a customer journey as a sequence.
Yeah.
And then you use the, LSTM or those type of things in a sequence. Maybe some action, for example, I sign up is important. I want to kind of carry on this information. And maybe I click on some other random help stuff. It's irrelevant. Maybe using the NLP framework, LSTM, I can kind of forget this action. I don't have to carry that. And then I can have this type of, more better process information and then feed into the recommendation engine or the reinforcement learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting idea. I guess not just for the online behavior sequence, some other type of model sequence maybe can also be anything related to process, right? Can be used. Maybe we can also borrow something from NLP to maybe not like building entire model, but it's kind of like a way of feature engineering if you think about it.
Yep. It's definitely like a very like I'm pretty sure for some some use cases it's like a really valuable way to kind of test things out, right? It's like test some new techniques. I'm sure some work and then some could maybe work less, right? But that's the same for all types of use cases, right? Like even sometimes like the most kind of tried and true like recommender system algorithms might not work on specific things. So you need to try something from other fields, right? It could work.
And you build the first recommendation engine, right? For the company you worked at the time.
Yeah, and, the telecom, yeah.
Right. So before that, did it have a widget for recommendation, for product recommendation on the website?
On the website side, yes, but they had the rules-based approach. Yeah, which is more like, and they had a smaller set of like widgets. So then when we were creating this recommender product, there was, first of all, more robust rules-based thing, which was served as a control group, an extended list of products, which was continuously updated. Because like, I guess, depending on the product side, maybe there were some seasonal recommendations they want to put in. So because like, I guess before we put the whole ML thing in, like we were trying to put the full update in like as closely as possible.
Yeah. And then when you use ML, when you launched that, you did A/B testing, and then looks like what was the metric? Do you remember? Like more people click or like purchase?
I think it was like a combination of like, and I don't remember the full specifics. Click-through rate was definitely one of them. And I think some sort of like, whether they continued down the flow, because each widget will, have a flow, right? Because they could drop out of the flow or go through a purchase flow or a payment flow, right? So I remember we were tracking that as well. I forgot some of the other specifics, but it's definitely a lot of stuff to do with like, is the engagement working, or are they clicking through? Are they engaging with it?
Yeah.
If I could mention one thing though, which is just like, I remember we did either put in some analysis after and we were able to iterate on that, but I guess probably because we had a lot, you know how it is, right? There's a lot of backlog items, right? So one thing I was cognizant of was like, of course, this is a big thing in recommender systems, which is like, we don't want to totally conflate the click-through of the first item or the second item with that it's just the most relevant. It could just be the location, like if someone sees something, they will just click through it even if it's not relevant, right? So there's a bias, position bias. So then I remember drafting up something or like having a ticket for drafting up a kind of spec for including that, but then I forget if we eventually implemented the full scope of that or not. But that is something in a lot of recommender systems. You can downweight the first item or something like that if you notice that the first item is actually like not that good. But if the first item is relevant, right, then it should be okay still to not do it's like, if I were a product manager, I would kind of deprioritize that thing. If the first few items still seem reasonable.
I haven't thought about it yet. I think there's a lot of, biases or interesting behavior patterns when it comes to, how people shop online. So the reason I asked, was there a widget before? It seems like there is a widget before, but people are clicking it more. I'm curious. So there are other widgets also on the website.
Yeah, so it was like a carousel, small widgets.
Yeah. And then I think that this one might be hard to know, but do you know whether it has some cannibalization effect with other widget, right? Because people are clicking this, maybe people are not clicking other widget. Is it overall, what is like? Is it net positive, net kind of negative effects? Are we able to measure that? Like, how does it affect like other widgets?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question, and I guess at the time we didn't address it. I guess like if I were to think about it now,
Mm,
I'm just throwing out random things to consider, which
yeah.
is like, I guess like it could, this is where like you could bring in some things from, let's say, reinforcement learning, which is like you could do some sort of random exploration, right? So this is what
Mm,
the YouTube example was doing. Like you just throw in something random in the top two spots, for example, right? So
yeah.
to bring people out of like, let's say, a rabbit hole or something. But they don't put that up there because that has the highest score at the time. They just put it up there for
Mm,
exploration purposes to see
yeah.
if they put something that the ML doesn't feel like it's relevant at the moment, but maybe
Hmm.
the customer still clicks it, then it turns out to be relevant. So they can update the data point for that.
Yeah, yeah. And for the audience who are not familiar with the concept that we mentioned, the cannibalization is basically when you have multiple widgets on the website, uh, they're kind of not like directly competing. Sometimes they're in the same kind of uh, customer journey. You click something and then maybe you also want to click something else. But sometimes if you click the recommendation widget, you're so obsessed with that, maybe there's another big promotion for like sign up or something, then you're not looking at it. And then if at that time the business goal is to drive sign up, maybe this recommendation engine is kind of hurting the other goal, right? So it's always a little bit complicated when we launch a very successful widget. So basically, what I try to say is, as a data scientist, sometimes we need to think about the entire ecosystem of all the widget. And sometimes, in my experience, sometimes a product manager launched something very successful, and then the other team are not happy. Hey, my widget becomes smaller. Nobody's pay attention to that. So I think it's really hard to say, what is good and what is bad. It depends on, what is the overall goal, right? What is the business goal you try to achieve at different stage of the business. And also we talked about new customer, old customer, for customer at different stage of their journey. Maybe you want them to see something slightly different. Yeah, just have those things in mind. Sometimes can help you launch a product that actually is useful and overall brings value for your company.
Yeah, yeah, you're totally right. And, I actually love the post you have on LinkedIn because, like, you often will be like, hey, it's important to communicate, or like, it's important to
Yeah.
understand, like, not just the algorithms, but also the metrics, right? Like, that's a lot of stuff that you also share. And I think I like totally agree on that. And I think that's something I really want to share with folks as well, which is like, it's
Yeah.
important to understand what the product's doing.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Susan. Another thing I learned when I worked on something similar to recommendation widget is when I launched the model, I just think about, the accuracy, the performance. Do people like it? Like you mentioned, are people clicking to the thing I recommend? And another colleague I work with, he mentioned is, are people using that widget at all? Like before
Mm.
you launch, right? What is the baseline? Um, if people are not really using the widget, even if you launch it, it's a good model, then people might still not use it. It doesn't mean your model is bad, right?
Right.
Going back to the whole ecosystem thing, like people are not paying attention to that. So maybe sometimes your model doesn't work, especially when you launch it to a website. It's you need to go back, take a step back. Okay, first, is this widget useful for people, right? Maybe you need to talk to a product manager or user researcher before you spend a lot of time to build a model. Have you had experiences like that, like something you build turn out, kind of ended up not being used by people, or vice versa, you build a toy model and getting used by a lot of people?
Ooh, yeah, that's such a good question. I think that's like a quintessential experience for data science, which is like,
Yeah.
because I remember like one of my first few projects, like I mentioned, there was like a churn model,
Mhm.
and then like, I
Yeah.
mean, it actually was in production and everything, and then it was being used in like, I think one or two loyalty and retention kind of campaigns, right? Because you see, hey, if they churn, then loyalty and retention will be like, hey, let's do something to, you know, send them a coupon or something, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, like, but I think there is like tons of models that like I've built that could have been like, it's like, hey, we might use it, but then it also depends on a lot of factors. So it might depend on
Mm.
the kind of like retention business orgs priorities at the time. They might be like, hey, like we collaborate and then we build a new model for some project. And they're like, hey, we're deprioritizing this project potentially, or like we're reducing the scope of this project. Right. So then
Yeah.
in that case, I know that I feel like in big companies, this is less likely where they would suddenly de-scope, right? But it's totally possible where like it is de-scoped or timelines
Mhm.
don't match up a bit afterwards, right? And then I guess since I've went on and worked with a few startups, like that is more of the case in startups where, you know, something might be in flight, and then like it's deprioritized. What I tried to do, because like when I've been working on like kind of startup-esque projects, is kind of see if there's a way to, first of all, make those into like modularized things. So let's say you're building a model, right? There might be some sort of thing in the data analysis that could be reused in a future project, right? Even if this current model is deprioritized. Usually
Yeah.
I like to plan in a way that like if it's deprioritized, we can salvage some of that, and like maybe that can be forked off, right? Like someone will have a fork off of this repo or something like that.
Right.
Um,
There can be something reusable in the future, right? For
yes,
different problems.
yeah. But like as you said, right? Like I have definitely encountered that stuff, and I've lived through that, and I just move on to the next project. But then after in experiencing that, I was like, hey, if I can build something in a way where if it doesn't work out, someone can actually build a fork off of it, right? Then that
Mm.
still is a win, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great approach to do that. Very, you kind of put it into like a system, right? Instead
Mm-hmm.
of each problem is a problem. So, what are some other challenges when it comes to recommendation systems?
Ooh, I guess like mentioned, I'll just throw out a lot of stuff. Like I guess I mentioned like how we figure out items, for example, and
Mm.
this is the same across like some different industries that I've seen, which is like the way they tag items is clean, but is not clean. So what I mean is like, okay, so I'm just gonna use Amazon as a quick example. So let's
Yeah.
say there's towels, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
they have words that are like, it's like I don't know, like fluffy, or I don't like. I think I was shopping for something the other day. Like I don't remember. It was like some sort of webcam or like a camera stand or something. And it'd be like tripod, stand, web conference, like like the long, like they just have a lot of keyword search related stuff. But then as a machine learning practitioner, you're like, oh, maybe I want to just categorize this into something clean, or like kind of use like some sort of word encoding, right? It's a bit of a struggle sometimes to like categorize items in companies which don't have a robust tagging system. So I guess like for startups, you might start off just tagging with like using like manual tagging, for example,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and then
Mhm.
for large companies, maybe they have a bunch of ways to do that tagging.
Mhm.
That is hard, honestly. Like I've seen things where it's like clean, but it's not clean. So it could be like there was like some label that's like um, there was an example, I think there was some point of sale system, and this is not in like the telecom example, some other example. It's like they have
Yeah.
some food that's like a quesadilla or something, but then they have some places that like tag it as like some sort of like shorthand, like case
Mm.
or something. And then it's like, I don't know, how do I know this is like a quesadilla or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, or like they will tag it as some sort of like nickname.
Mm.
Yeah, so then it's like that is definitely an interesting problem. And I think for companies that have a longer history of data science, they've already built up some sort of cleansing algorithm or some sort of sorting, categorization algorithm, right? But when you're just starting out and you're looking at it, you're like, this item is like iPhone space 5S. I don't know. Like that's like simple, simple kind of like data string manipulation. But like when you first start out from scratch, you're like, what is this? Yeah. So I think that's definitely one thing of Rex's, and a lot of what we talked about, which is like, how do we know if the reward isn't, or like the kind of optimization of the function isn't like pushing you to do something silly, right? Like talking about how if we're optimizing for, let's say, just clicks or, or just some other stuff, overall usage or, things like that, that is a big challenge. And I would say in all the times I've built these things or been on these projects, there was iteration. Yeah, but hopefully the company and the project allows for the time to do that. Sometimes you're kind of like the data science team is really pressed and you're just moving on to the next project. Yeah, that also has happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like for a recommendation engine, especially you build something that people actually would click, you do have to, follow up downstream with the product team, with engineering team, or not just think about the model performance, but also think from the product metrics perspective.
Yeah.
And for your previous, the problem you mentioned, the mislabeling, kind of a data quality issue, how do you solve that problem? Do you like have to kind of do some manual audit or other ways to automate that?
Ooh, yeah. So I guess like I haven't necessarily dealt with like a huge kind of like scale where it was like extremely bad, but like when just like some simple text cleaning is where I started off as, or some using some sort of like vector distance, like kind of vectorizing the, let's say, the phrase and then finding like, let's say
using the cosine or sine to see how similar kind of two vectors are, and then the vector represent the words or the products.
Yeah. So I've tried that. They actually, like, when I tried one of them one time for the recommender system, it didn't work. Like it was just like kind of like non-conclusive, right? So yeah, it wasn't conclusive for that. I think eventually we just kind of like scrapped it and went with an even simpler. Like we had another kind of feature that was like a very, very simple label, and that was actually clean, right? But if I had wanted more labels in conjunction, then I would have to undergo a more kind of NLP focused project, and we didn't have the time to do that. We didn't do that in the end. We just used like a very bare bones, or like kind of for that specific feature, right? But because we're still using tons of different features, like hundreds of features or thousands, but like just for this one specific like item description thing, like I wasn't able to really come up with a distillation. Yeah,
that sounds like an important decision you made for the project, right? I stick to the simple label but kind of cleaner, at least it's accurate.
Yeah, that's definitely a trade-off, and I think it was worth it, but I think at the moment it's really hard to say.
Was it because you feel like you're losing information, right?
Yeah, indeed.
And since that's the first recommendation engine system you build for the company, are there some other important decisions or this type of trade-off you made?
So I think like one thing was with the models. I think because I mentioned like I had prototyped a matrix factorization based model and then like an XGBoost model. So I think at the time, it was really hard to say if both of them were going into production or not, right? So I think like being able to do the offline evaluation, so just like using some historical data and being like, hey, let's pretend that at this moment, like they had been presented, these items that both algorithms had recommended, like would they hypothetically have clicked through? Like there's pros and cons with using that, and I would have to argue that because they didn't really, from a UX perspective or UX perspective, like they're not actually seeing it, right? But then so it could really not be accurate by using offline evaluation, but based on the way I had to answer questions from stakeholders, and I feel like it was it's the data science responsibility to be able to provide them some peace of mind, right? So deciding to use this kind of offline evaluation to be like, hey, like the ML algorithm is learning the correct behaviors or like good behaviors, um, you know, as opposed to like, let's say we had an offline control group historical data to use as well, right? So then we're able to kind of still compare that, but trying to communicate that and then deciding to put forward these two models in the end to be in production was also one thing. Because like there were other approaches that I could have tried as well. And I think I built a prototype for like an early version that wasn't as computationally optimized as the ALS model, the alternating least squares model. There was like an older thing I tried. I forgot because it was so long ago. Yeah, but then I think I ditched that one because it was very slow. Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's things like that. Yeah, but like I guess all that to say is like the model development process and putting things into production is like lots of unknown.
Yeah, and then previously you just mentioned you using the historical data to test your model, and since the previous kind of a rule based, where you're just looking at based on those rules, are people clicking into the same item you recommended, or like are your recommendation in the like top 3 things they clicked after browsing the product? Like how did you, because you didn't really have the direct kind of V0 recommendation model to compare, how did you get that data?
Oh, so for the rules-based one, it was just kind of like based on, let's say, this kind of like decision tree, not the machine learning kind of tree, but like the literal, like, hey, if they have overdue bill, then recommend pay bill, for example, right?
Right.
Like we are able to have data from that because you're able to, just generate like, oh, if we treated the rules-based approach as its own ML algorithm, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like the rules-based approach will actually still rank, like have like tile, like widget 1, widget 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Or like tile 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know what way the camera is, but like this. Yeah, so like, if we have a rules-based approach or some sort of random, like you just randomly sort them all, right? That can be another control group, but we use the rules-based, which is like if we just use these rules and this kind of rules-based decision, they will still rank the tiles, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Like if they have a pay bill tile, it will be number 1. And then if they have a suggesting you can upgrade to iPhone tile, like number 2, right? So you can still generate the same exact kind of like data format, like a data frame as like the recommender system.
Got it. And then how do you know, because you're testing data on the rule based, I guess my question was, how do you know, this new recommendation is better through comparing to the old data versus doing A/B testing using like new data?
Oh yeah, that's true. And like I said, like we did do the live, A/B testing after, but this was just for before it was in production. We had to get some more buy-in. So like that was the way we had to do it. Yeah. So we did do it live afterwards. Yeah, but I'm just from a kind of like business perspective, they wanted the prototypes to have project updates, right? So that's the way we had to communicate that. But we did ship it live. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, got it. So you basically use that, the rule-based kind of the previous people's choices to compare the other 2 options you had. One is XGBoost, another is matrix factorization. Got it.
Yep. Yeah. So, and that was that was like kind of more as a progress update / like stakeholder communication purpose.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So I always kind of fascinated by the different type of testing. You have to use an older product. It might not be accurate, but it might be able to help you to select, pick 2 models. But you also need to make sure the one you picked actually outperform the old model by testing on real customers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when it comes to putting models in production, what are some common mistakes you see people make, or some mistake you have made?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think like it because I guess like there's different types of org. So I guess I might combine some examples from like larger orgs and like smaller orgs. So I guess like smaller orgs, the data scientist is more likely to be the only data scientist. So like I guess for one of the startups I was involved in, like I was the only data scientist, and then like as a consultant, and then basically like I had to work closely with the engineering team to do these things. And then I think for a mid-sized team, there is kind of, because we know that I guess like when we are trying to prototype something, we might use like Jupyter or something, right? And then I think like the way, when I first started out as a data scientist, right, like I might also just like have a Jupyter script and Jupyter notebook and then export it as a script or something. But then when I do it that way, there's like, and that's still the way I still do it. I still export it to let's say a .py. I might jot something down in a Jupyter notebook, and then after a little bit, I might like export it and then put it into production. But it really depends on what the production is in that company. Some companies, they are productionizing the Jupyter notebooks, right? They just have to run the notebook, and then a notebook like write something to a database, and they just like the data scientist can just hand this off or like just put it on like the platform or something like Kubeflow or whatnot. And that's like, I think that would have been a good approach sometimes, but I think like something when I first started out was like the thing I mentioned about like modularizing things so I can reuse them. So I found that like I was reusing some stuff. I would waste time rewriting some ad hoc stuff at the beginning of my query, or when I was querying the data initially. So I would write some like tools and things like that. So I would think like for productionalizing is actually pretty important to break the things out into like modularized components, right? So either I myself as a data scientist, a teammate, or if I move on from this project to another project, onboarding a new teammate, like it's easier for them to use it, right? And I've seen this cause a lot of issues in different teams and different orgs where it's kind of like the thing. I used in my head, or like in talks I've given, I've called it like a Jupyter notebook graveyard, right? Like it's kind of like these just like notebooks that are just, they're like untitled one or something, and that's fine, right? Everyone has some untitled .1 like IPy notebook, right? But like if there's usable stuff, just like break it out. And I think that's made a huge difference in the speed of when I get started on a new project as well. Like there's some queries that I use over and over again. Sometimes I can share with the team. Sometimes the team shares, and then like I can use their little tools and little things as well. So yeah, I think production, like that's really important. Yeah, and then I would say like another thing I have learned when I'm going for more of a end-to-end data scientist, which is like, you know, writing more like more production side like tests, or writing stuff like communicating more with engineers and like writing some more things like that are sometimes in larger works that might be taken care of a separate person, but then just like learning to do those things as well was something I guess was more like a lesson that was learned.
Thanks for sharing that. And so what was your day-to-day like as a principal data scientist?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of that was actually mentorship, and also like there was a project I led, which is like building the kind of end-to-end ML platform on Kubeflow. So for that one, there was, I think, 4 to 5 members at a time, because like there were, I think, 1 or 2 co-ops, and then, you know, interns in co-ops or interns, and then so they came on board, and then we're able to have like this whole onboarding flow for them for this project that I created. So I think one of the things is like, as a principal data scientist, and I think this is something that really differs a lot. So there's this website that's called like staffeng.com or something. It's like staff engineering, right? Staffeng.com by Will Larson. So then he I guess, interviewed a lot of kind of staff or principal level, and it's not data scientist focused, but it's like engineer focused. But, like I think a lot of what I do kind of echoes that, which is like there is kind of a trade-off between how much I am coding and how much I'm multiplying the team, right? If I can onboard someone and then they can do 2x what they were doing last month, just thanks to, I guess, like their hard work and then their ability to learn from the stack, right? It helps them faster, right? So it's more like a force multiplier. A lot of things that I was doing was, again, like prototyping. So I would prototype something. If it works, then I could suggest that like we can move this into a full-fledged project with more resources, and then find the right people to staff this project, as well as kind of identifying how to staff the project. And in a smaller company, it's sometimes harder because everyone's like, we're short-staffed everywhere. So I had to be like, hey, we really need to do this. So I guess like that part, I would say, is like in different companies, sometimes only people managers do that, right? But then I guess in a smaller company, I also had to be the one to identify what kind of folks we need to staff the project as well as lead the project, to go from a prototype to a larger scale project that would then spin off like different forks or different teams, things like that. And then also like kind of from the prototypes, also kind of maintain our day-to-day machine learning stack. So we had like there was like basically the main product of the company is like an on-demand machine learning kind of serving model, serving kind of like API thing, or like web. I feel like I've been talking for a little bit, so then my like thoughts have been like slower. So yeah, basically it like serves ML on demand. So whenever a customer comes in, right, it'll kick off like 10 or so machine learning models. So it'll have like 10 different recommendations, and then it even runs like a comparison between those 10 models, kind of in semi real time. So it's not like, millisecond real time. It's more like a few minutes real time. But because like the business decision is that like, well, the user doesn't need to get the result immediately. So it's actually fine to be like 20 minutes at max or something like that. So like maintaining that production stack. So I would say I was much more end to end at my previous role as the principal data scientist, because like it was a smaller org than the previous company. And then I had to do a lot of software engineering as well as kind of ML ops or DevOps stuff. Eventually, we did hire like a larger ML ops team that was kind of spun off what I had recommended to build, like the way we built the platform and whatnot. But they were able to scale up from like what I took from the prototype to like the mid MVP product to kind of like more like after V 2.0 or something like that. So that was part of my responsibilities as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So you have a lot of responsibility at work, and you also give a lot of talks. You're a game developer. How do you find time or to do all of the things?
Yeah, so I guess this is where when I was in maybe undergrad or master's, I had started to build up and kind of think about ways to increase my productivity. And I would say like when I was a student, it was because I was a keener, so I wanted to, increase the amount of things I could do in a given time and still have time to play video games or go out and hang out with people or something like that. And so I started doing like Pomodoro, which is like, focusing for, let's say, 25 minutes and taking a break for 5 minutes. I've been doing that for so many years. But then it was actually when I was in my master's, like I was still kind of like, hey, I need to do a lot of stuff, right? I have trying to self-learn programming, and then I wanted to, find a good career in data science, things like that. But yeah, like I guess when I really discovered what productivity meant to me changed at the time, because like I actually wanted to use productivity to allow me to spend more time with people that I love, because I got into a car accident on kind of like one of my first week in my master's. And then, I was just like very lucky that I didn't have any like kind of severe injuries, right? But then
Yeah.
after a few months, I got the news that my mom was in a car accident and it was very
Mm.
severe. And then after that, thankfully she recovered. But I think both of us were, quite lucky. And I
Yeah.
think after that, I started using the tools that I had built for productivity more to be like, I do want to do all these things, but then I want to do a lot of things in a shorter amount of time. So I have more time in like the evenings and the weekends to spend with the people that I love because time is pretty, fleeting. Life is short and I had a scare and then I was scared that like my parents would kind of have some sort of accident or something against.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think from then, like I just feel that there's a lot of stuff that I do. Like I have kind of a daily structure for my daily routine and things like that.
Mm.
Like I have, I try to like schedule out things, right, and then make sure I can prepare for different talks. But then I try to
Mm.
get it all planned out and done, and then I have a block time for like the game studio stuff.
Yeah.
So that's usually on the weekends. And then as long as I hit, like, let's say, sometimes it'll be like I'll do 3 hours a week of the studio stuff. And if I do 3 hours, then I'm done for the week. Right. So then I still get to do that, but then I also have a cap on what I do.
Mm.
So I don't burn out because I actually find that like I'm more productive when I take a break. Like I've literally,
Yeah.
literally discovered that kind of the hard way because I remember like there was this time when I was like, oh, and I also like did part of my master's when I was working full time. So I was like
Mm.
studying for this exam or something, right? Like it was like a midterm or final exam, and it was like pretty hard. Like I had to study like 10 to 12 hours a week after
Yeah.
full time work. Or maybe even more. I think there was one week I tracked down every hour that I did, and it was like 18
Mm.
hours. That was like the maximum in one week. And then that was like after full time work. So then I was just like, I think I was a bit burned out after that. And I wasn't really doing much after that period of burnout. Like after I took the exams, I was like, oh, my brain is like fried,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I think I just feel like those experiences make me feel that like taking a break in a sustained manner is better to help me do all these things at once. And also sometimes taking a break is nice because like if I'm thinking too much about data stuff at work,
Mm.
then I can refresh and think about something else, right? Speaking at public conferences and things like that, like the PyCons that I've spoken at and like other like machine learning conferences, it definitely requires a little bit of a different skill. And creating presentations, is like not that exciting, but it's more like it's at least it's not coding, right? So it's like
Yeah.
something else to do to refresh my mind. So I think like
Mm.
having like two or three main things to do that are not including work, but then some other stuff, right? It helps me refresh my mind and helps me get everything done. And then using the systems like Pomodoro and kind of like a daily routine. Like I've shared some of this stuff on like my blog as well, like shoesandshoe.com. So there's some I've written more detail because like it's like so much to talk about. I could talk about
Yeah.
for like hours. But yeah, like I think that has really helped me to get the things done and also like
Mm.
focus on what I do think is important, right? Because I feel like career development is really important and that's something we have to keep in mind for ourselves. Because I find that like when I was able to get more career progression, it was when I was more mindful of it and like more cognizant of it,
Mm.
right? So then I think that is super important as well. I don't want to sacrifice one for the other, but I think it's important to be able to free up the time for some other things that will is more time limited. So like my time with my parents, for example, right? That's
Yeah.
more, there's a more of an expiration date on it. I think it's important to
Mm.
set that time aside before it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think I like that you mentioned you just work on, the game related stuff 3 hours, but sometimes it's hard like I struggle with sometimes I put a time box, like a time oriented goal versus you know, how do you say that, the task oriented goal? Like I want to finish something. Is it hard that you tell yourself, oh, I have to stop, it's 3 hours, but like you're in the middle of something, do you just like stop?
Oh, actually, yeah, you're right. I don't necessarily, but I do still try to like keep it like from going
Uh-huh.
too long. But sometimes if I'm like almost done, I might increase it by like an hour or so. But then I actually do will stop after. Like it won't go like maybe like double the time. Like
Mhm.
probably very unlikely unless there's like a big deadline coming. But the good thing about the game development is like I don't really, but the deadlines are my deadlines. So
Yeah.
if I'm extending it, it's extended. So
Right.
yeah. So I think for that it's less time sensitive. But
Mhm.
before I was writing like my blog, like there was a period I was writing like once a week. I would have an article each week. So then that was more time sensitive. And that actually did vary. For some articles it's shorter. I could write it in like an hour. There were some articles that took like 6 hours. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that one was more task oriented.
Mm.
And then that one, but I think at least there was still kind of like an up there's a
Mhm.
ceiling. There's a ceiling still for that. But
Yeah.
I totally get what you mean. Yeah. And sometimes it does creep up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I know there's a lot of things you want to talk about more on your blog. I recommend listener to check it out. But if you can just share like a few core things with us about productivity, what do you want the listeners to know?
Ooh, I think one thing is tracking. So I think
Mm-hmm.
when I'm not really tracking that much or putting stuff on my calendar, like people use different things, right? Like some people like write it down, they have a to-do list. Some people they have, for me, I just put the stuff on like my calendar, basically my
Yeah.
Google Calendar or something, and I'll have like maybe 9 to 10. I'm like doing game dev, and then like
Mm.
even I put like shower or like eating on the calendar.
Yeah.
I know for some people that might be they don't want to do that, right? But I think tracking it. The second thing is actually accountability. So what I mean
Mm-hmm.
by that is like when I was actually the most productive. Like I don't track this detailed anymore, actually, but
Mm-hmm.
if I am really, really in a crunch, like accountability is important. So accountability means that like if I promise myself that I would do this today and I didn't do it, there's a mark of it. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but it's not really that harsh. Like who's gonna like do anything, right?
Yeah.
It's just me, right? But even
Right.
just like writing down like, oh, I'm moving this to tomorrow, right? Like that is acknowledging the accountability that I didn't finish
Yeah.
it and then I moved it to tomorrow, which is fine because
Mhm.
I'm not going to scold myself for moving it to tomorrow. I'm just acknowledging it,
Yeah.
right? It's not
Right.
negative, but the
Mm.
kind of addressing it is good. Another thing is when I'm using Pomodoros, the way I trained myself to really focus for, let's say, 25 minutes or 50 minutes is when I get distracted, I actually pause the timer. So, like, I'm on my phone, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'll pause the
Mm.
countdown timer for the focus time. Yeah, so like things like that, just acknowledging that, hey, I'm distracted, but I am letting myself get distracted, but I'm also doing an action that acknowledges that I'm getting
Yeah.
distracted, and I pause the timer, and then I'll restart the timer when I put away my phone. Yeah, so then
Mm.
eventually I kind of been like, oh, I'm too lazy to pause the timer, so I just won't check my phone, like something like that. Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah, I like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
acknowledge that. So you kind of make a mental note and then you actually use the Pomodoro to track the time you are focused.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I would
yeah.
still say, it's not that I'm trying to really, I'm not like kind of like some sort of like really strict teacher or something for myself, right? Because like no one's gonna do anything if I'm just checking my
Right.
phone, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
acknowledging it, right? Like
Yeah.
I think it's also
It's a
not
type of
good. Yeah.
mindfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
productivity doesn't equal some sort of like, like we're training like so like hard and rigorous or something. It's just a way to focus, like my being mindful of what I'm doing with my time. Yeah, because I feel like there's definitely sometimes when I when people hear about productivity, they might think different things, right? They might think like
Yeah.
this person is like super like strict and like super like this or that. But I think for me, like I use it as a way to be mindful that I'm not just like mindlessly squandering my time, right? Because I want to be present when I'm doing things, and I want to be present when I'm not doing things, when I'm spending time with the ones I love, right? Because I feel that if I'm not done doing something, let's say, right? And then I just keep thinking about it when I'm spending time with people. And then I just keep
Yeah.
getting distracted. So then it's like not the most quality time with them.
Right.
Or like if I'm getting distracted when I'm doing my stuff, it's not the most quality time, right? So I guess the overall goal is just like if I'm spending time on something, whether it's like social or on doing like my stuff or work, then I should, be able to put my quality attention to it. Yeah, so it's not like some sort of like immense like strict regime where I don't have any fun or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a tool.
Yeah. And I think you phrased it perfectly. You said, I want to have more productive time because I want to have fun, go play, and spend time with loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned you have a routine. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, for sure. So actually, like I like this could vary when I'm traveling, but most of the time I'll like wake up, I have coffee, and then like there's some weekly routine stuff like I mentioned the blog writing, but I did take a little bit of a hiatus for that because I can explain that afterwards. But yeah, I just like have some block time. I'll look at my daily to do in the morning, like respond to some emails in the morning, because like for some game dev stuff in the morning. And then I guess like I'll start work roughly around like 9 or so. But I think one thing is like chaining different things to coffee, which is what I mentioned. So like after coffee, I will do this. And this could change, right? So before it could be like writing my daily to do, but recently it's been responding to emails. So you can just swap that out. Or for some people, it's like after my coffee, I can, take a little break and then exercise, or like before coffee, I can exercise or something like that. So I find that whenever I'm building a new habit, I love to chain it to coffee. So like before coffee, I do this, or after coffee, I do this. That's helped me build a lot of habits.
Right.
Yeah, so then I guess like there's like work. I try to put block times where I'm not distracted. So I'll try to do Pomodoro. Of course, like that really, I guess like sometimes there's like Slack or something. If it's urgent, then I'll look at it. If I'm really doing Pomodoro, I might like, it really depends with work, but I do try to get that Pomodoro in. Try to schedule meetings at a more specific time in the day. And this actually changes from month to month, right? Because sometimes there's a team recurring meeting at some time, for example, right? So then I can't Pomodoro at that time, obviously, right? So I might have to move the Pomodoro time to like later, things like that. And then in the evening, I also have like this, I guess I kind of chain things to like sometimes brushing my teeth, because we all brush our teeth every day, right? So like it could be like before brushing my teeth, I'll do this. So it's been like exercise or something like that. I have a daily exercise, which I basically don't really break the chain for. Like I think this is another thing for like habits and accountability, which is like when I was trying to build up this exercise habit, and I don't do that much exercise a day, like 10 to 20 minutes only. But it's like every day I would actually mark down that I did it or didn't do it, right? So then you kind of like I think this is online people call like, keeping the chain or like not breaking the chain, right? So then it's like I would do that, and then it's like the accountability thing I mentioned before, right? If I don't do it, I have written down that I didn't do it. So there would be like an X, but I'm not judging myself for not doing it. It's just written down, right? So then with that, I was able to build up this kind of like daily kind of routine to do that like every day. And then I think before I was traveling again due to COVID, like there was like a period of like, I don't know, like 18 months where I did not break the chain at all for like any single day.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think
that's awesome.
like, yeah, the accountability is
Mm.
cool for building new habits, or like if I want to do some habit of like reading sometimes a day. But I actually do kind of swap these things out because I guess recently I haven't been doing that. I've been like, if I actually want to like say like I want to play video games after like like this time of the day, then I can actually
Yeah.
do that too. I just chain it to something after, and I try to get my exercise done. Like, of course, I actually still like more recently, it's kind of like depends because I have more. I guess as there's been more social events, as like
Mm.
there's been less lockdowns because where I was
Yeah.
at, there was so much lockdowns, like maybe more than the States, because like
Hmm.
Toronto, we were actually in lockdown like until pretty like, I wouldn't say recently, but it was like much later than lasted much longer than
Hmm.
other parts of the world. So I guess as more social events have opened up, like there are some days where I don't do the full extent of my routine, but I'll just write it down. Like at the end of the day, I actually write down some stuff like, did I do like this exercise thing? And then I will actually like have different like little markers in
Hmm.
my journal, and then I could swap that out. Because I think before, when I was trying to rebuild my Pomodoro habit after, I think I was in Asia for like 3 months or so. So then I didn't really do that because traveling, it's kind of like okay to change the routine. But then when I was rebuilding Pomodoro, I would write like a little P on my journal at the end of the day if I had done like just one Pomodoro.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I didn't, I would write like an X, like next to the P or something like that.
Right.
Or if I do my exercise, I'll like write like something like, it depends on the exercise, right? So I have
Hmm.
like planks, so I'll write like P, another P, yeah, or like push-ups, like PU, and then like a check mark or something like
Yeah.
that. So it's just like every at the end of the day, I'll just write down those things that I want to track.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the not to feel shamed about missing something is also very important because sometimes we feel like ashamed. For example, I wanted to like journal every day, but then I think about I'm not journaling. I feel a lot of shame, and then I make me kind of want to avoid this activity even more. Yeah, so I think to kind of separate the activity versus your the shame or your ego is also important. I just want to measure that as a data scientist. I don't
Yeah.
have to criticize myself. Yeah, so thanks for sharing your productivity tips. And you mentioned you stopped writing, and also now you become an independent consultant. What made you want to have those changes?
I guess like for the writing is like I noticed that I was rewriting a lot about similar topics. So I think
Mm-hmm.
like when I write, I try to write about stuff like maybe a bit before. So maybe like after I had time to look back on that.
Mm-hmm.
So then like I realized I was like, done writing about a lot of the stuff in like the large corporation in telecom. So then I was like, and I already wrote a lot of stuff about productivity, and then I guess it
Yeah.
hasn't changed that much since then,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then I wanted to take some time to just learn stuff, because
Yeah.
when I went through those experiences, it was like the experiences of a few years, right? And then I wasn't writing for all of those years, right? It was just like I had a few years to accumulate things.
Mm.
And then I wrote about it in the span of like maybe 2 to 3 years or so, and I finished
Yeah.
writing about it, right? But then now I
Mm.
must allow myself a few
To learn
more,
again.
yeah, a few more like months or even
Mm.
like a year. But I think I still have a lot of topics to write about. I keep an ongoing list of blog ideas, and I still
Yeah.
have a lot of them. But I just
Mhm.
wanted to allow myself some time to learn so then I can, write that.
And now you're independent data scientist. What are you excited about? Like, do you have some projects lined up?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess like I can't share too much about some of the details, and I guess like it is highly likely that I'll resume full time again at some point. But I think right now, actually before my big, I guess like my first large full time role and then the second large full time role, I had done consulting in the middle. So I found that it was a good way to just do stuff as a way to take a break while still keeping myself in data science. Usually
Yeah.
it's with smaller startups, so I was able to, still get my hands dirty with data. Um,
Mm,
as well as just like it's really fascinating to see like because there's some consulting opportunities that are not necessarily like, hey, I'm writing code, but it's more like an advisory
mm, mm,
situation. So then I'm actually able to learn a lot of domain knowledge and work alongside the folks that are doing some of the product decisions, as well as like
mm-hmm.
mentoring those data scientists. Those are things I like to do. And then it allows me to like keep my schedule a bit more flexible. But yeah, like I said, like I guess it's dependent on maybe my next plans. I'm still planning this out, right? Like I'm trying to find out what I am doing, what my next 5 years might look like, and then in
Mm,
that time I could just not I guess like resume full-time work at some point. But right now I'm working with some really exciting kind of like startups, and then there's stuff that's actually in production and being used.
mm.
And the time from kind of like conceptualizing to production is really fast. Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
a startup, right? So I think that is
Mm,
really interesting, and just like getting that rapid feedback, right? But I mean, I've also learned that from the time did the first consulting gig before as well. Like the feedback was like extremely fast. So I felt that was like a really interesting way to learn,
mm-hmm.
right? And learn about different stacks too. Like that was the
Yeah.
way, it's a way to look at different stacks and understand different stacks, different domains, right?
Mm.
And then different ways of thinking about ML products and production.
And so you spend a lot of time developing games. Are there any kind of philosophy or like inspiration you learned from game developing?
Yeah, yeah. So I think games actually taught me a lot more about product and, of course, like the coding portion, because I guess for the PyCon talks I've spoken at like internationally, it's actually about game development and then not about the data science part of
Mm.
Python. But I learned a lot of good practices, I would say, from just like building up a game. I learned about tech debt in my own game, like building my first game to like doing my second game and trying to reuse some stuff. And it was like really hard to reuse, and like it was really hard to make changes to. That's tech debt that I created. And I learned how to manage a team because, for the game, I'm not doing the art and the music and I guess like some other stuff that I try to delegate nowadays. But like because of that, I had to first of all like find contractors to do those things and then also manage them. So then I would actually have a portion of my time it's not necessarily all software these days, but rather it's like management of the different contractors around the world that the company
Mm.
has hired, and then I just kind of focus and give them feedback. And then when it comes time to program everything, because I guess it's more like a pipeline based deployment, which is like development, I mean, which is like we might prepare some of the art first or some concept art, right? And then there would be the story of the game. And then before that, I was actually trying to program in parallel to that. But then what happened is like because the story and the setting of the game changes, then I had to reprogram stuff. So
Yeah.
then I like iterated and I was like, okay, I need to wait till these things are done before I start programming.
Mm.
Right. So these days I don't actually do that much like, day to day programming for the game anymore, but rather I do these kind of like management things. And then when it comes to
Yeah.
the step in the pipeline, then I'll do the programming.
Yeah. And when you manage your live projects and game, do you use any tools for project management, tracking?
Yeah, yeah. So I used to use GitHub projects. So it's basically a Kanban board which you can connect to GitHub PRs and GitHub issues in that
Mm.
repo. So it's like associated with a repository. So then I could actually just have like game issue, which is like, oh, update menu text overflow or something like that. right? And then I could just like pop it onto the GitHub projects.
What about your own project? Like in general, oh, my writing, my day. I know you have a journal. Do you use any tools to track?
Oh, yeah. So for my journal, I use a pen and paper journal, actually. I have like, I think that right now it's like on volume like 20 or something, 22.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like since I think like 2017 or something like that. So I use that primarily for the accountability things I mentioned, which is like, I want to build these habits, and then did I do it today? Did I not do it today?
Yeah.
I use Google Calendar to block out the time. So like I mentioned, sometimes I'll be like, take out trash on a Google Calendar. I might not necessarily do it at that point. Like the take out trash
is
a
reminder.
Yeah, as a reminder. So I love to use like some sort of calendar suite to block out things and write my to-do, because I tried keeping another to-do list somewhere else, but then it was like really hard to
so keep it
track.
simple.
Yeah. Recently, I have like these, what's that called? Like index cards that I just keep on my table. So I think for this one is like, let me see. This one actually was like some sort of to-do.
Oh,
yeah, I can just read it, because I think it's like, backup computer and wipe OS, and then like Daliana, which is like this one, and then like the sort of event planning, and then like send the invoice, stuff like that. So like if I really want to, like, sometimes I just want to not need to look at my computer for the to-do list, and I'll write it down on
just put it on the paper.
Yeah, on an index card or something. But I do treat this as kind of like a throwaway kind of thing. Like I might just like throw it away afterwards. So I actually keep it really simple. I also use Notion though for like notes and things like that. So I might organize.
I love
Notion. Nice.
Yeah, I use that to plan my podcast schedules, because you can click into the cell and expand into a page. So like I can copy paste something I did research on this person.
Nice. Yeah, I also like Notion.
Cool. So is for all your productivity, your habits, did you learn that from some books? Do you have any books or blogs to recommend?
Ooh, so I guess like there's some high level stuff that's like not necessarily a productivity technique or anything, but actually it's funny because I learned a lot of things from, there's one thing that's called the 12-week year. I actually highly recommend this. This kind of helped me set up some block times. Yeah, so it's called just like 12-week year.
Okay.
And then I recommend like the shorter version of it, which is like a workbook as opposed to the full book, because the full book has some sort of other stuff in it. But the workbook is just like, like people are, like the longer the deadline is, the task sometimes expands to fill that deadline, right? So sometimes we think about things in like Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. For a company, that does make sense, but for an individual, sometimes that's too long out. So if we treat like 4 months, right, 12 weeks, 3 months, like a year, right, then like the Q1 is like really soon, and the Q2 is really soon, right? The Q3 is pretty soon, right? And the Q4 is pretty soon as well. So like using that system, so it's almost like a sprint for 3 months instead of like a 2-week. You could still do like 2-week sprints or something individually, but it's kind of like, hey, I want to do something, and then I have roughly a 3-month timeline to do it, right? So then it just makes it seem more urgent. And then I find that by doing that, I'm able to think about things like it's pretty accurate, right? If I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this in Q4, then it's like so far away that I don't really think about it, right? Yeah. So by narrowing down to like, I'm just looking ahead and focusing on something for the next 12 weeks, right? I'm able to bring it into more like urgent perspective. And I really recommend that, even though it's not necessarily about like, Pomodoro or anything. I had to combine all that stuff. That's a really high level structure.
The 12-week year.
Yeah. So then, and I guess like just in general, I would recommend Pomodoro, but I guess like it's not necessarily some book, but just like the
technique.
Yeah, the technique of doing that, and then combining what works for you. Some people do not like it. Some people's jobs, it's hard to do it. So because I've worked with, I guess, managers and like product managers, et cetera, right? Like sometimes their calendar structure is totally different from like an IC, right? They can't,
Mm,
they have like fast context switching, right? So they can't do that. But I think there's still ways to just like focus on blocking time off, right? For people whose schedules where they can't do Pomodoro. So they can still do
yeah,
something similar, but it might not need to be so strict.
right. Yeah. And so, how do you see your career grow? Do you want to stay or grow to be kind of chief data scientist, or do you want to have your own company or become a manager? Like how, or you're still trying to figure it out?
Ooh, so this is a really good question, and it's something I actually don't have an answer for right now, but
Mhm.
here are my thought processes. So
Yeah.
I guess like I've always really focused on learning. So I think when I was choosing to go from telecom to fintech, right? One thing I really love about data science is it allows you to go into different industries, right? You
Yeah.
can learn the domain knowledge, right? And one thing I wanted to, and I have been learning, which is like going from, it's almost like different spectrums, right? Large company to small company and what's in between, this industry, that industry, how they all tie in. Because there's things I've learned in telecom that have helped me surprisingly for any other thing, because they use techniques that are used in finance and banking, right? And vice versa. So I think my next steps is like I just want to learn something. I want to have the responsibility to, do the same thing that I was doing before, which is like being able to mentor and multiply a team, right? Like by helping them become
Mm.
kind of like actually there was one article that really spoke to me on staffeng.com, and I forgot whose interview it was, but it was like they were saying that like my job as a staff or principal engineer is to help a junior engineer become a senior engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I mean it's like part of the job, which is like you let's say you have different team members, you're able to help multiply their strengths, right? And of course, like while doing my other IC roles, such as like prototyping or writing good code, working on the product itself, like I'm still doing that, right? But while spending the time to multiply other people as well, that's something I want to do. And then I could stick in the same industries I've been before. It wouldn't be any issue to return to fintech or return to telecom, for example. But I guess like one of the startups I'm working with right now is kind of they're aiming to be in the social media space. Of course, it's like more of a smaller startup, so the data is not like super like it's not like hey I'm going to suddenly be able to do this and that, right? It's like kind of building up the data pipelines, building up the way to do like prototypes of machine learning and get it working end to end in production, right? So
Mm.
those are cool things that I've been able to experience. But then I guess like for the next like kind of large company I work in, I definitely want to still continue to learn, right? So I think having a different domain would be cool, or like
Yeah.
diving deeper into one of those previous domains would be cool as well.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think that's where I'm thinking for now. And as for
Yeah.
the kind of, I've given a lot of thought to whether I want to do people management track or the
Mm.
kind of individual contributor track, right? And I think
Yeah.
one blog that's helped me a lot is like Charity Major's blog. I think people in the industry might have heard about her. It's like charity.wtf blog. I think she's like the CEO, don't quote me on this though, like of Honeycomb, which is like an observability company.
Mm.
Again, don't quote me on this full title, like find it on LinkedIn or something. But like she writes a lot about like her career journey from like IC to people management to IC to people management and so on. So I think like it might be worth it for me to do that as well, just to try it out if I find that I'm not learning as much in the IC role anymore. Or
Mm.
it could be a hybrid, right? Like I don't mind that, but I really want to focus on learning, right? So if I can learn more from being a people manager and then become a better IC after doing people manager, for example, right? Like that would be helpful. I found that through the game company actually, because I basically doubled as the only product manager, unless from there was actually a term where the I had a CS student who wanted to do product, and he helped with setting up a Kanban board for Notion and then setting up some tasks there as well. So like, until that time, the company had been around for like 2 to 3 years. I was the only PM person, right? So from that experience, I learned how to talk much better to PMs, right? And then I found that they're able to support me better because I learned that. So I think that, hey, maybe if I eventually become a people manager, I can learn to be a better IC or vice versa.
Right.
It's possible
Yeah.
too.
It's not like a one-way door. You can
Yeah.
always switch back, and then it's good to have that experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I don't have a solid answer, but these are all the things I'm thinking of. And I think for people who are interested in planning their path, just know it's actually fine if, you don't know where you're going. Like, I don't know where I'm going necessarily. I'm just thinking about all these things, and maybe you will think about them, or if the folks listening have some other things they're thinking about, I'm definitely curious to hear too, because I always love to hear what people are focused on or how people make those trade-offs, which is what kind of drew me to the kind of staffeng.com site or like charity.wtf site, because they have gone through the struggles of, do I do people management? Do I do IC? Right? And they wrote about it, right? So I think like that helped me think about it too, because people share it. So I'm fascinated to hear what people want to think about in their career. Because before I read those blogs, I didn't know that I could consider these things too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, what is something you're excited about this year in your career or in your life?
Ooh, I guess like a lot of the stuff I have projects wise is like very slow burn at this moment. So I'm looking forward to all of them, right? The kind of data science stuff I'm working on, or like any sort of future consultant projects or full-time roles that I like change to eventually, or just like building the next game for my game studio. But like, I think it's like, I'm looking forward to all those things, but then I'm also learning to have more patience, because like, I think before I'd be like, I need to finish this in like 2 weeks or something, right? But now I'm kind of like, I want to learn. Oh yeah, this ties into the kind of learning I mentioned for my blog, which is like, I have written about a lot of stuff that I experienced. Now I must be present in the moment to learn in these few months so that I can write about it later, right? So I'm looking forward to that. When that happens, I have all these things that I've learned and I can like share it and distill it. Yeah, but like right now, it's like kind of, living in the moment, observing and, just feeling present, and then doing my things one by one.
Yeah, that's great. For people who want to read your blogs or follow you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, like folks can add me on LinkedIn and also find my blog on susanshu.com. So that's like susanshu.com. Yeah, then there's also kind of feel free to sign up. So then when I write something new, you can get an email as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it was great to have you on the show, and I learned a lot from you. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, thank you.